And welcome to Chicago Bulls Insider. Today, we are talking about if the Chicago Bulls should trade Nikola Vucevic. And so before we go ahead and jump into the content for today, I first want to remind you to slam dunk on that subscribe button, just like Modest Mazelis slam dunks in games. And so in exchange for slamming on that subscribe button, I'm going to give you nothing but daily content around the Chicago Bulls. So make sure that you hit that subscribe, you hit that like button, and you join the Chicago Bulls Insider family. So we talk nothing but Chicago Bulls basketball. And so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. And let's start with Vooch. And should the Chicago Bulls trade Vooch? And so yes, I think that the Chicago Bulls definitely should trade Vooch, and there's a couple reasons why. And so let's start with number one, the Chicago Bulls have gone in a different direction with this roster. It's definitely a roster that has gotten younger. And then also, two, in going younger, that means that the timeline has also changed as well, as far as getting to, playing some real winning basketball. I think that this team has just obviously got to build towards that. And so when you talk about the youth movement, especially at the center position for the Chicago Bulls, I think that when we look at what Zach Collins and then also to Jalen Smith did, I think we feel good about what they did. I think that both players showed that they could really work with all the guards on this roster, especially Josh Giddey and Kobe White, who I think the Chicago Bulls are probably looking to build, their future backcourt with these two players. And so, that is huge because you've got to make sure that you have players that really can work with some centerpieces there that you have in the backcourt. Both of those players showed that. And then they both showed that they could work in this new offensive system that the Chicago Bulls want to run. And that's, getting up and down the floor. That's knocking down three-point shots. That's being available in the break, for the lobs and things like that. And also, too, being able to be a good passer. And so I think that both of those players certainly fit, the timeline and what the Chicago Bulls want to do. And with Vooch, he definitely can still play in this system and he can play with these players, but you can definitely tell that the role certainly changed a bit with the Chicago Bulls, especially down the stretch once they moved on from Zach LaVine. And this is why I love Vooch, because he's just the pro's pro. And so the way that he responded and really played well down the stretch, and we're going to take a look at the numbers, I think that it just shows just how much of a pro Vooch is and just how great he is really on any team. And I think he's going to make an impact anywhere he goes. But, I think that that's the point. The Bulls are going younger. You have players behind him that definitely fit the timeline and what you want to do. So I think that that is why you would want to move on from Vooch. And, I think Vooch even knows this. And so if you got a chance to look at the end of the season press conference, that was actually on YouTube. You could see it under the Chicago Bulls Sports Network and really look at what Vooch had to say. Josh Giddey, Kobe White, and AK, they all spoke there. But if you want to just read an excerpt as to what Vooch had to say, you can go on to Bleacher Nation. This is by Elias Schuster. This was an article a couple days ago. But just highlighting what Vooch said, and he even admits to the fact that, look, this team is a young team, and he talks about that it does take time. And it depends on their timeline and how they see this team. And backing up a little bit more in the quote, he's talking about that he's at a stage in his career where he wants to win now. He wants to play in the playoffs. He wants to hopefully make a deep run. And, with this team right now, with it being younger and the timeline that they're on, that doesn't necessarily fit, I think, what Vooch wants to do. I'd love to see the Chicago Bulls be in a winning situation next season, but in the reality of the matter, the Chicago Bulls still have a lot to really build to get to that point. And so that's why it's like the timeline, the youth movement, it just makes sense to move off of Vooch and probably move him out the way. And then you can really go ahead and now start to allocate some more minutes to Jalen Smith. You can allocate some more minutes to Zach Collins, and you can also allocate some more minutes to your draft selections coming in to the team, because I think that that is going to be important, especially when you're talking about really trying to build, just the foundation of this team. You need to have them get out there and get some experience. I've said this before. They're not going to get the type of NBA experience that you need in the G League. They actually need to get out there and play some games. And so that is point 1 and 2, really why the Chicago Bulls should move him. And next, I think that the next reason why the Chicago Bulls should move him is because his trade value, I think, is at a good point right now. I think if you look just back at this last summer, one of the things that was talked about around Zach LaVine was just the trade value. And just like, man, could he rehab this trade value? And he clearly did. And I got to give a lot of credit to Zach LaVine and how he played. And he did get moved to the Kings. But with Vooch, I think the same questions were around him going into this season. And when you look at the numbers for Vooch, it suggests that, look, his trade value is there because this season he was at 18.5 points a game. That's up from 18 even. So a slight increase there. The assists were up slightly. He was at 3.5 assists this year. He was at 3.3 assists last season. I think that you got a chance to see Vooch as a little bit more of a playmaker because they used him at the top of the key a lot more. I think that his role changed down the stretch. Rebounding slightly down. I mean, it was 10.5 last year, so 10.5 rebounds a year ago. It was 10.1 this year. Still, Vooch is a walking double-double, which I think any team would love that. But I think really the key out of just the numbers and really why I think it is time to move on from Vooch is because his field goal percentage, it was phenomenal because he went from 48.4 a season ago up to 53% this season. And from downtown shooting the three ball, that was a phenomenal improvement. He went from 29.4% up to 40.2% this year. That was a terrific jump for Vooch. And I think that that right there is something that I feel like would entice a team to go out and get him. And I just think that the question is, will the Chicago Bulls do it? Because with AK, I think traditionally with this front office, they have held on to assets longer than they should. And I think that this is a prime time to cash in on Vooch. I think this is a situation where I would like to see the Chicago Bulls not attach an asset to Vooch. I mean, if you did do that, I would hope it would just be a second round pick. But again, I'm saying it again, I hope that the Chicago Bulls would not have to attach an asset to him. But to get a younger player, you probably might have to throw in a second round pick or something like that. And so, that's fine. I just think that this is the time that you want to cash in on those numbers. And another thing with Vooch, he's on an expiring contract. He's at 21.5 on the last year of that deal. And so I think that the contract is something that is certainly movable. And I think that when you look at a team like the Golden State Warriors, who I just looked at them in the playoff series, I think that they still very much need a center that can stretch the floor and knock down the three ball, much like Vooch does. And defensively, I think that you could probably have him obviously not be the best defender, and he would still be impactful for this team. Would he be a starter for that team? I don't know. That's a big question. Don't cover the Golden State Warriors. And I think that the Los Angeles Lakers, they also need a center. I think that they need him to probably start. They would need somebody that could stretch the floor like that. And even though he's not the biggest defensive presence, which we know that with Vooch, you at least get a player that he's going to show and he can, just be a benefit on the offensive end. So there's definitely some teams that I think come to mind as far as getting Vooch. But the question is, will this front office let Vooch go? And I think they do owe it to Vooch somewhat to get him to a winning situation because he's been the pros pro. But I think also this front office owes it to itself and to the fan base to start to get this team continuing down on this youth movement and getting this team to a winning situation. And so the quicker that you start to move on from the last versions of the team, and then you go ahead and you give more runway to this youth movement, I think the better off that the Chicago Bulls are going to be as far as getting to the long-term goal of becoming a contender again. And again, you just really have to clear the runway for the upcoming draft picks that you have, and also to the players that really showed some real promise here this season. And so anyway, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Do you feel like that, yes, the Chicago Bulls should absolutely trade Vooch? Or do you feel like, you know what, they're going to hold on to Vooch? Because I do see a reality in which they could maybe hold on to Vooch, and they also could maybe even wait to trade him until the next season's trade deadline. I think that that's also something that's realistic, but I want to know what they're going to do, because AK did mention after the trade that was made with Zach LaVine or whatnot, when he had his presser, that look, there had been groundwork done. And so I wonder if a Vooch deal was part of that groundwork. And so we'll find out. But let me know in the comments what you guys are thinking. And as we always say, go Bulls. And I will see you on the next one. All right. Peace.